back to my YouTube channel. My name is Noah, and I wanted to welcome you to another video where I discuss the different type of lifestyles that you can have with varying incomes. We started these videos with a salary of $40,000, and in this episode we're going to look at a salary of $90,000 and what kind of lifestyle you might have with that. With that being said, let's get into this episode of Life with $90,000. Okay, so here we are back again in the dashboards that I've created in Excel for these different examples. If you're new to these videos, basically what I like to do is I like to take a base salary, in this case $90,000, and then I like to structure three disparate types of lifestyles that someone might live with that salary. The first living scenario is going to represent an individual who's very hyper-focused on all of their benefits, retirement, and making sure that they're not burning through all of their leftover income. The second scenario is an individual who's trying to take home as much of that salary as they can, usually opting out of all of the employer benefits that might be offered. Third, but certainly not least, is an example of someone who's kind of in the middle between example 1 and 2. So they're not taking home as much of their income as possible, but they do want to make sure they're at least contributing something to their retirement account and also having their health benefits and other benefits as well. So currently right now we are looking at example 1, right? So this is the person who is all in on their retirement and making sure that their money's not going to waste and so on. So as we discussed, the salary is $90,000. I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quickly because I want to spend some time on some of the other conversational topics here. But each check amount, this is going to come out to be right around $3,400. And as we know, this individual is contributing $884 from each check. And they're paid, bi-monthly, so 26 pay periods per year. And there's going to be $884 going to their 401k. They have $80 for their health insurance. They have $5 for their dental and $70 for their vision. They also contribute $160 to their HSA account, which is the maximum for 2024 at this point. This will lead the taxes per check to be $540. Thereafter leading the take-home income to be $1,722 per check. So monthly that's going to be right around $3,731, and the annual take-home income is going to be $44,772. So at this point, now that we have a salary of $90,000, we have a decent amount of money to play around with, even in the example where the individual is hyper-focused on their benefits. If you recall, if you've seen the earlier episodes where we started at $40,000, $50,000, at the end of the contributions to our 401k and our benefits, it really didn't leave us with much money at the end of the year. Basically, our take-home income was relatively low. However, now that we're in the $90,000 range, we have a pretty substantial amount of money to take home, in this case $44,000, almost $45,000. So now let's insert some expenses that this individual might have and see how much money they have left over after living and entertainment expenses. So now I want to incorporate a little bit of the expense side of things. So let's assume that with the salary they are, deciding to go out on their own. So they have their own apartment and they have their own lifetime expenses, right? Everything that's going to be included: food, groceries, entertainment, and so on. So I do like to keep things consistent. So for rent and mortgage, we have that at $1,000. Electricity per month is $80. Utilities $40. Groceries $400. Their vehicle is a decent deal. They're only paying $300 a month for their vehicle. Gasoline per month is $150. We're going to say they don't have a child, of course, and that's it. We're going to assume that they're very healthy, so they don't have any kind of weird medical expenses. I think relatively healthy people, just with normal checkups, accumulate a little bit of medical expenses, but for this example, let's keep it at 0. Let's say they have a pet and their pet fee, basically pet expenses, are $15 per month. We're going to also assume that they don't have student loans, which is quite a rare thing, but we're just going to use that for this example. And they don't have any other debt, and their phone is $30 per month. So those are going to be all of our essential expenses, and I keep that consistent for all of these examples just because it makes things a lot easier to follow. And that leads our total essential expenses at $24,000. So at this point, we know that our take home is $44,000. So there's going to be money left over, right? If our take home is 44,000 and our essential expenses were 24,000, there's a decent amount of money left over there. So let's start incorporating some of the more non-essential expenses, and then let's see where that leads us. Okay, so for the non-essentials, let's assume that their discretionary expenses, all of their toys and their clothes and so on, are 200 a month, right? So 2,400 on the year. Let's assume that their entertainment is 200 per month as well. So this is, going to shows, going to concerts and stuff like that. Let's assume that their beauty expenses, right? So haircuts and, facials, whatever this individual does, are 20 a month, 240 on the year. I know for a fact that this is probably pretty low, and I can acknowledge that, but just let's use this for this example. Their fitness is a pretty cheap gym, right? $20 a month, which is pretty good. And their miscellaneous expenses, $150 per month. This comes with, living in your own apartment and, having your own car. You just need to buy things, right? To keep maintenance up and so on. And finally, let's assume that they're dining out, right? So their dinner's out, their takeout and all of that stuff is going to be 200 a month as well. So this is going to lead our non-essential expenses to have a total amount of $9,480. If we take that and we add it to the 24,000 from our essential expenses, that's going to total just over 33,500, more specifically $33,660 between our non-essential expenses and our essential expenses. So at this point, we can see that there's a decent amount of money left over, right? There's $11,000 left over. And, at this point, after, now that I'm looking at it, I feel pretty good, right? It's the first time I think, in these examples with different salaries and so on, that I'm actually at a point where I could see this being, pretty decent, right? $11,000. Maybe you put it all into saving, or maybe you put 5,000 into saving and then 5,000 into another external investment account, which is something that I think is absolutely crucial as well. So, in this specific example, it feels pretty decent, but I think there's still a decent amount of room for error. Where this $11,000 left over could be dwindled to a pretty small amount. If they had student loans, if they had a more expensive car, if they had a kid, right? If they had a kid, let's just count this a wash, right? Count this as a wash. There's no money left over. And this also depends on what your savings goals are on an annual basis. Are you looking to save $10,000? If so, you barely make it with this, assuming that your expenses stay within reason, stay within this budget. Pardon me right here. But then that also doesn't lead you to have any extra money for investing outside of your 401k, which I think is absolutely essential, to be quite candid. So for this example, unfortunately, it kind of looked good at first, but after I started talking about it, I kind of realized that it left a lot to be desired, right? Not only, if our expenses were higher, right, our monthly rent, $1,000 is actually really good. I think, in 2024, a lot of people that I know personally for one bedrooms and so on are paying $1,400, $1,500, sometimes, $1,600 a month for that unit. So that would completely negate this $11,000 that we'd see left over here. So in this example, I think we're on the right track. We're definitely getting really close to getting my seal of approval for this example. But for what we're looking at right here, if your expenses are within this range, I think it's still a decent bet to either stay home, or if you're in the situation where you're splitting a lot of things with, a roommate and so on, that might be an option. But going out on your own, I don't think is the wisest decision here. So now let's move on to the second scenario, right? Which is someone who wants to take home as much money as they can. They want spending money, right? They don't want to contribute to their 401k, which is a big mistake, obviously. They're even opting out of benefits, right? As we can see here, which also leads their taxes to be relatively high per check, $884 per check, right? That's quite a bit of money, which leads their take home per check to be $2,577 per month. That's $5,500, and then take home annually is $67,000, which is a very handsome amount, right? That's a lot of money. for the majority of people in the world. But now let's start putting in those same expenses that we did before and see kind of where we end up. So I'm not going to go through it again, but basically you guys get the picture. It's $24,000 for the essential expenses and $9,500 for the non-essential expenses. Leading the total expenses between the essentials and non-essentials, to be $33,000. This leaves quite a bit of money left over. In this example, $33,000 left over after our essentials and non-essentials. So I think a lot of people would look at this and say, yeah, this is completely fine. I can move out and I can still do whatever I want to do. So I'm not sure, right? I want to play around with the numbers a little bit to see if this is feasible, right? So let's say this individual has a savings goal per year, right? And everybody should, right? You need to continue to build your savings for, large expenses, emergencies, and all of that kind of stuff. So let's say they want a total amount per month saved, maybe of $500. So 500 is 6,000 on an annual basis. So let's up this a little bit just to see if we can get kind of close to that $10,000 mark. So perfect. $800 a month saved is just under $10,000 per month. And this is what that's hypothetically, let's say that this is the amount of money that this individual wants to save per year. And I think that's pretty good. Now, of course, this leaves quite a bit of money still left over. We have $23,000, nearly $24,000 left over to play with. So, this individual could say, well, Noah, I know I'm not contributing to my 401k, but, what if I just put all of that money into into my another retirement account, right? We're a little bit negative here, but we can assume that it's going to be relatively close to this. And that's good, right? $24,000 or nearly $24,000 invested into an external account is a really good thing. But in this example, they're missing out on potentially free money that their employer, might be offering through their 401k. That's a red flag. The other red flag, of course, is not having any kind of insurance. So, if we take this back, right? If we take this back and there's $23,000 left over after, putting some money into savings, if there's something goes wrong, right? And I always reference something going wrong medically and how expensive it can be in this country. There's very little forgiveness, right? If things go completely wrong, it's extremely expensive just to get a cavity. It's $500 to $800 perhaps, depending on where you're at. But let's also look at some of the expenses. As we discussed previously, we know that $1,000 flat per month is actually pretty low, right? There's all these miscellaneous fees, and depending on your area, the average could be $1,500. But I think what I like to do is I like to go to maybe $1,400, something like that. So of course, the money is going to go down a little bit. It's not much, right? We still have $18,000 left over to play with. But let's say maybe groceries, right? $400 per month for groceries is okay, depending on who you are as an individual. I personally like to eat, right? So 400 is pretty low. Maybe let's bring this up to maybe 500, right? And I do know that 300 per vehicle is actually relatively low. I think I did research this a little bit, and the average for a vehicle is honestly right around $500. So let's just up this a little bit. Let's just maybe say it's $450 or something like that, right? They wanted a nice car. They have they're making $90,000 pre-tax. That justified getting a nice car for themselves, right? And $450 a month is a pretty decent car. Let's keep gasoline where it is and just leave that. Let's assume that they don't have a child. Like I said, once you add kids or kid into this equation, it gets really messy, and it's really hard to predict where you're going to be. So I'm just leaving it open, or I'm leaving it as 0 for this. I might start a new series where I kind of discuss the potential costs of how much it would be to actually have a kid. But for these videos, I'm going to leave this blank. Let's assume again that they're maybe healthy. They're pretty healthy, no expenses. We'll leave the pet as 15, but let's say they have student loans, right? That's a lot of people have student loans. Depends on who or where they went to school and how much they took out. But let's maybe up this to Maybe they pay 250. I don't know, something like that, right? So now there's even less. Now there's $12,000 in this account, right? We'll leave their phone here at $30 a month. But now let's discuss the non-essential expenses. And this is where I think there's a lot of variability because people like to spend money on non-essentials. It's the way of life, right? We like entertainment, we like tangible things, we like goods, we like services, and we like, we just like spending money on stuff that we don't necessarily need. And that's just how it is. So let's adjust this a little bit. Let's say discretionary, 200 a month, to be honest, is relatively conservative. Maybe let's bring this to 300 a month, something like that, including, when Christmas time rolls around, when, birthdays come around. 300 a month on average might seem relatively low. Entertainment, this is, like I said, going out, going to the theater, going to movies, going to shows, going to amusement parks, all of that kind of stuff. 200 a month is, I think, pretty low for this, considering, when you live in bigger cities and you want to go to, basketball games, football games, whatever, it's like 200 a ticket, right? So maybe we'll bring this up to, maybe let's bring this up to like 350. Beauty is another one where it just fluctuates quite a bit for each individual. And it's really hard to come up with a decent number for this, especially, between males and females. I know 20 a month is pretty low. So maybe let's bring this up to, I don't know, maybe 40. Maybe. I think that's decent. Now, I did mention that they are at a relatively inexpensive gym, right? $20 a month. But let's say this individual, because they're active, they like to get a little bit of maintenance done, right? So they like massages, as everybody does. This day and age, they're not really that cheap. They're maybe $80 a time. So maybe let's say they want to go once a month, right? So we're going to add 80 plus the 20, and we'll just make this 100. And then, of course, there's miscellaneous expenses. Now, this is difficult as well, right? Because for some people things go, mildly wrong, and for other people, their whole world falls apart and they're paying for all this random shit left and right. So I think we should bring this up just a little bit for this example. Maybe let's say 200, or actually let's say maybe we'll keep it at 200. I think on average that's okay. And of course, last but not least, dining. Dining is extremely expensive nowadays, especially if you are in a big city where, the days of like the mom and pop shop are behind us, and it's all, chains, it's all high end restaurants where, the minimum per head per visit is like $150. That's without tip. So 200 I think is relatively low, and that's per month, right? So I think this could easily be double if I'm being candid. I think maybe we should go 500 here. 6,000 on the year. I think that's honestly pretty fair. So now, after we adjusted the expenses for a more realistic amount for someone that's making $90,000, it really changes the rest of the finances, right? So now we're left with just a measly $4,500. So, if they wanted to invest that, right? So they invest $4,500 and call it good. What I like to revert back to is this individual right here on the year would have invested $4,500 versus the individual right here is investing $884 per paycheck, right? So this is going to be equivalent to about $23,000 on the year. I mean, how many times, this individual? So in this example too, when you look at the leftover money after the taxes are taken out and stuff, there's quite a bit left over. We saw that the take-home annual is like $67,000. However, when you put realistic expenses in here, it's easy to see how this individual could be check to check, or just could be left at the end of the year with $5,000 or $6,000 in their savings and then nothing else, right? It's really easy to see how that kind of stuff can happen. So, of course, with this example as well, I definitely don't recommend opting out of all of the benefits that might be offered to you. And of course, as we see here, they have a really good salary, $90,000, right? But that's still being spent on, their essential expenses and their non-essential expenses as well, leading them at the end of the year to quite possibly be left with not much. So the third and final example that we're going to go over, like I said, is the person who's in the middle. So instead of investing 884 into their 401k, they're investing 440. They still have all of their health benefits, but instead of investing 160 or basically putting in 160 into their HSA account, they're putting in half of that. This is going to lead their taxes per check to be $681, their take home per check $2,100, and their take home annual to be $54,000. So after putting in all of the expenses that we previously had before making the adjustments, it looks like we are left with $21,000 after our essential and non-essential expenses, right? So this is pretty decent, right? I look at this and I see someone who's contributing, a decent amount, right? $11,000 or $12,000 to their 401k on an annual basis. It's not horrible. It's not amazing, obviously, but it's certainly something. And they're still left with $21,000 where they could put in another $500 a month into a Roth IRA, for example, right? And they're still left with $15,000 that could go into savings. Now, that's assuming that your expenses between your essentials and non-essentials stay here. Obviously, as we went over in the previous example, things really get thrown out of proportion, right? When we start getting a little bit more realistic with the expenses, right? Having a monthly rent of $1,000 may be pretty unrealistic depending on your area, and all of the other expenses could be realistic, or they could not be as well. I'm not going to adjust all of these in this example because we kind of know where it's going to lead to. It's going to lead to this individual basically having nothing to either save or invest in a external account at the end of the year. But of course, it depends. If you are in a situation where your expenses are like this, right? They are pretty low, and maybe you're splitting things, whatever it may be. This is certainly maybe not the worst path, right? You're still investing. Obviously, it's not the maximum, right? But you're still putting away a decent amount, and you still might have a decent amount to save at the end of the year. $15,000, for example, saved in this example, along with $6,000 in a Roth is pretty good. Honestly, I think that's a really good point. So if this is you and these finances, these expenses line up with where you're currently at, in this example, I think living, maybe on your own might be difficult, right? It depends on if you can find these expenses living alone. But if you're splitting things, I think this might be feasible. So there you have it, guys. I know this video went on for a little bit longer than I would have wanted, but of course I want to make sure that I paint the whole picture for what your life might be like with these different salaries. And of course, I do want to hear from the audience as well. What do you think of the 3 examples that I've set up? Do they resonate with you? Are they accurate, or am I completely off? Please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you are in a position to where you're looking to augment your personal financial status with financial analysis and personalized budgeting, that's exactly what I do here at AFA. If you have any questions for me personally, or if you'd like to take a look at the financial services that I can provide to you, I've left my email and a link to my company website in the description box below. If you've stayed around in this video for this long, thank you so much for your time today, and of course, happy financing.